Random House Audio presents In the Company of the Courtesan by Sarah Dunant. Read for you by Richard E. Grant. Rome, 1527. My lady Fiammetta Bianchini was plucking her eyebrows and biting colour into her lips when the unthinkable happened, and the Holy Roman Emperor's army blew a hole in the wall of God's eternal city, letting in a flood of half-starved, half-crazed troops bent on pillage and punishment. Italy was a living chessboard for the ambitions of half of Europe in those days. The threat of war was as regular as the harvest. Alliances made in winter were broken by spring, and there were places where women bore another child by a different invading father every other year. In the great and glorious city of Rome, we had grown soft, living under God's protection. But such was the instability of the times that even the holiest of fathers made unholy alliances, and a pope with Medici blood in his veins was always more prone to politics than to prayer. In the last few days before the horror struck, Rome still couldn't bring herself to believe that its destruction was nigh. Rumours crept like bad smells through the streets. The stonemasons, shoring up the city walls, told of a mighty army made up of Spaniards, their savagery honed on the barbarians of the New World, swelled with cohorts of German Lutherans, fueled on the juices of the nuns they had raped on their journey south. Yet, when the Roman defence, led by nobleman Renzo de Ceri, marched through the town, touting for volunteers for the barricades, these same bloodthirsty giants became half-dead men, marching on their knees, their arseholes close to the ground, to dispel all the rotting food and bad wine they had guzzled on the way. In this version, the enemy was so pathetic that even were they to find the strength to lift their guns, they had no artillery to help them, and with enough stalwart Romans on the battlements, we could drown them in our piss and mockery as they tried to scale their way upwards. The joys of war always talk better than they play. Still, the prospect of a battle won by urine and bravura was enticing enough to attract a few adventurers with nothing to lose, including our stable boy who left the next afternoon. 2 days later the army arrived at the gates, and my lady sent me to get him back. On the evening streets, our louche, loud city had closed up like a clam. Those with enough money had already brought in their own private armies, leaving the rest to make do with locked doors and badly boarded windows. While my gait is small and banded, I have always had a homing pigeon's sense of direction, and for all its twists and turns, Rome had long been mapped inside my head. My lady entertained a client once, a merchant captain who mistook my deformity for a sign of God's special grace, and who promised me a fortune if I could find him a way to the Indies across the open sea. But I was born with a recurring nightmare of a great bird picking me up in its claws and dropping me into an empty ocean, and for that and other reasons I have always been afraid of water. As the walls came into sight, I could see neither lookouts nor sentries. Until now we have never had need of such things, our rambling fortifications being more for the delight of antiquarians than generals. I clambered up by way of one of the side towers, my thighs thrumming from the deep tread of the steps, and stood for a moment catching my breath. Along the stone corridor of the battlement, 2 figures were slouched down against the wall. Above me, above them, I could make out a low wave of moaning, like the murmur of a congregation at litany in church. In that moment, my need to know became greater than my terror of finding out, and I hauled myself up as best I could until I had a glimpse over the top. Below me, as far as the eye could see, a great plain of darkness stretched out, spiked by hundreds of flickering candles. The moaning rolled like a slow wind through the night, the sound of an army joined in prayer or talking to itself in its sleep. Until then, I think even I had colluded in the myth of our invincibility. Fear spiked my gut as I scrambled back down onto the battlement. In a fury I went to kick the sleeping sentries awake. Close, their hoods became cowls, and I made out 2 young monks, barely old enough to tie their own tassels, their faces pasty and drawn. I squared up to the first, pushing my face into his. He opened his eyes and yelled, thinking that the enemy had sent a fat-headed, smiling devil out of hell for him early. His panic roused his companion. They crossed themselves frantically, and when I questioned them, waved me on towards San Spiritu, where they said the defence was stronger. The only strategy I have perfected in life is one to keep my belly full, but even I knew that San Spiritu was where the city was at its most vulnerable, with Cardinal Armellini's vineyards reaching to the battlements, and a farmhouse built up and into the very stones of the wall itself. Our army, such as it was when I found it, was huddled in clumps around the building. Half the men were stupid with terror, the other half stupid with drink. I never did find the stable boy, but what I saw instead convinced me that a single breach here and Rome would open up as easily as a wife's legs to her handsome neighbour. Back home, I found my mistress awake in her bedroom, and I told her all I had seen. She listened carefully, as she always did. We talked for a while, and then as the night folded around us, we fell silent, our minds slipping away from our present life, filled with a warmth of wealth and security, towards the horrors of a future which we could barely imagine. By the time the attack came, at first light, we were already at work. I had roused the servants before dawn, and she had instructed them to lay the great table in the gold room, giving orders to the cook to slaughter the fattest of the pigs and to start preparing a banquet, the likes of which were usually reserved for cardinals or bankers. While there were mutterings of dissent, such was her authority, or possibly such their desperation, that any plan seemed comforting at that moment, even one that seemed to make no sense. The house had already been stripped of its more ostentatious wealth, the great agate vases, the silver plates, the gilded crystal Murano drinking glasses, and the best linens had all been stowed away 3 or 4 days before, wrapped first inside the embroidered silk hangings, then the heavy Flemish tapestries, and packed into 2 chests. It took the cook and the stable boy to drag them into the yard, where a great hole had been dug under the flagstones, close to the servants' latrines. When they were buried and covered with a blanket of fresh feces — fear is an excellent loosener of the bowels — we let out the 5 pigs, bought at a greatly inflated price a few days before, and they rolled and kicked their way around, grunting their delight as any pigs can do in shit. With all trace of the valuables gone, my lady had taken her great necklace, and to every servant she had given 2 fat pearls. The remaining ones, she told them, were theirs for the dividing, if the chest was found unopened when the worst was over. Loyalty is a commodity that grows more expensive when times get bloody, and as an employer, Fiammetta Bianchini was as much loved as she was feared, and in this way she cleverly pitted each man as much against himself as against her. As to where she had hidden the rest of her jewellery, well, that she did not reveal. What remained after this was done was a modest house of modest wealth, with a smattering of ornaments, but without the stench of excess many of our neighbours' palazzi emitted. Indeed, a few hours later, as a great cry went up and the church bells began to chime, each one fast on the next, telling us that our defences had been penetrated, the only aroma from our house was that of slow-roasting pig, growing succulent in its own juices. Those that lived to tell the tale spoke with a kind of awe of that first breach of the walls, of how, as the fighting got fiercer with the day, a fog had crept up from the marshes behind the enemy lines, thick and gloomy as broth, enveloping the massing attackers below, so that our defence force couldn't fire down upon them accurately, until, like an army of ghosts roaring out of the mist, they were already upon us. After that, whatever courage we might have found was no match for the numbers they could launch. From that first opening they flowed up and over into the city like a great wave of cockroaches. And thus, on the 6th day of the month of May in the year of our Lord, 1527, did the second sack of Rome begin. What couldn't be ransomed or carried was slaughtered or destroyed. It is commonly said now that it was the Lutheran Lansquenet's troops who did the worst. While the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V might be God's sworn defender,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?